So tonight I want to talk a little bit about mitochondria and how they are the source of illness. I literally just got back from New Orleans last night. I was at Dr. Jack Cruz's 4th of July event. I was actually one of the featured speakers at the event and got to start off the talks with essentially the three things I always talk about for heart attack prevention: the CT coronary calcium score, the CIMT carotid scan, and the endopat, testing your nitric oxide release from your endothelium, the inner lining of your blood vessels. But then I also talked a lot about how light interacts with the mitochondria in your heart to improve health. So I'm going to go a little bit over what I talked about there and also just mitochondria in general. So it's always good to have props. So I kind of have to do this two ways. So front and back. So this one says powerhouse, and then this says mitochondria. So I have a little plush mitochondria toy that I usually leave in the office that says powerhouse. So the mitochondria, they're the organelles in your cells that make energy. So millions of years ago, the mitochondria were their own bacteria, and then they had a symbiotic relationship with a other cell that basically engulfed it, deleted a bunch of the genes from the DNA in the mitochondria, and then the mitochondria's only job was to make energy and send information and energy to the nuclear DNA in the cell, and the cell would take care of whatever the mitochondria needed. The mitochondria has like 13 genes that all they do is code for energy, and there's some other genes that code for certain other things but they're not as important to talk about tonight, because life is mostly about energy. Without energy, you're a stone, or you're a corpse, essentially. So energy is what makes the world go round. So the mitochondria, they're on all the cells other than red blood cells. Those get turned over too fast for these things to actually be in. There's some other reasons why you don't have mitochondria in your red blood cells, but the three major places that you have your mitochondria are your brain, your heart, and your musculoskeletal system and immune system. Obviously, I'm a cardiologist, but anything that fixes the mitochondria in your heart tends also to help with your brain function. So, hello everybody for joining. Thanks for joining tonight. So the mitochondria, they make ATP. That's an energy currency. So most people think that food is the main thing that drives that. Food has a role, but it's not the be-all end-all of energy production. A lot of it is about the light that your body is exposed to, and I learned a lot of this over the weekend at Dr. Cruz's event. You've seen me been wearing these glasses for years. There's reasons why I do this. It's all about the light environment. Back to the mitochondria. If your mitochondria break in a certain cell, you basically have energy brownouts. You don't have enough energy in those cells, and things start to fail. So if mitochondria in the brain start failing, that's what Alzheimer's, Parkinson's is. Mitochondria where I'm focused, the heart, you get a cardiomyopathy, you get a weak heart, a heart that can't squeeze, or heart that can't relax. Get coronary artery disease, blockages in the arteries that feed the nutrients to the heart. And then your musculoskeletal system, if you don't have good mitochondria, you're going to have very poor strength. So the mitochondria, like I was showing you before, the little organelles, they have these different, I'll back it up a little bit. That's why I'm showing this on the screen. Let me flip it around here on Instagram for 1 second. Oops, I guess there's no, for the Instagram people, there's a little box there if you want to ask questions or put them in the comments. I will answer them as we go, or I'll answer them at the end. Let me just flip around the camera here for a second. So, all right, so this is a little bit challenging sometimes to run it at 2 for 1, but I think we can do it. So the mitochondria, as I mentioned a little bit before, they have their own genome, or they have their own genes, and they're different from the genes that are in the cell. So they're not the nuclear DNA, they're the mitochondrial DNA. And there's a famous researcher named Dr. Doug Wallace at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia that in the late 80s or early 90s actually had discovered that the mitochondrial DNA was inherited only from the maternal line, or from your mom. So if you see me in the office, this is the reason I'm asking patients about what is the health of their mother. Did they have cancer, heart disease, autoimmune conditions? Because those are all essentially tied to a mitochondrial issue. And then asking about your maternal mother's health. Again, if your mom's and her mom's history is poor, you start off with bad mitochondria. So you can be a newborn baby, but you're essentially 50 years old by your mitochondria health. with certain things that you do with your environment, you might be able to improve that and delay the onset of diseases. But this is one of the reasons why there's childhood cancers and people getting heart disease in early age, is that they're basically born old because of the mitochondria. So the original mitochondria essentially came from Africa, especially this eastern rift area. And you can get your mitochondrial haplotype from 23andMe, and I believe you can get it from Ancestry, but they'll tell you what your mitochondrial haplotype is, and it'll basically tell you where your original maternal line came from, and this has some implications on what environment is optimal for your health. So originally, all people had L haplotypes. That's where mankind originally evolved. And L haplotypes, you'll hear me use the word coupled. So back to the little mitochondria guy, there's 5 respiratory proteins in it. You can think of them like little fingers, and coupled is that they're very close together. If they're far apart, they're uncoupled. So when there's respiratory proteins that are coupled, like the ones in the L1, 2, and 3, energy is very efficient. They need to eat very little food because there is no waste. It quickly makes energy. This is one of the reasons why athletes from this general region, Kenya, they're excellent long-distance runners because they're extremely energy efficient. But when these haplotypes started to move out of Europe and move out of Africa and into Europe, the haplotypes kind of evolved over time, and many of those haplotypes became uncoupled. So those respiratory proteins came apart. So the respiratory proteins, their job is to pass electrons along like hopscotch essentially until it gets to the end. And at the end, there's something called the ATPase. It's like a top that spins. The faster it spins, more energy comes out the other side, the ATP. So when people had moved more north, they became less energy efficient because they needed to, because it's extremely cold up here. And you don't need to run as fast. There's not lions and tigers up high, but these cold weathers would cause you to freeze to death. So the uncoupled mitochondria release heat. So when they release heat, that keeps you warm, and that causes the water that's around the mitochondria to heat up as well. And then maybe we'll get to the point, but it may be a little bit too much for this talk, but it improves the exclusion zone of the water around the mitochondria, and it's another source of energy for the cells. But back to kind of the haplotypes. Myself personally, I'm a K2A. So this doesn't mean that you necessarily have to live in this environment, but you should likely try to mimic it as much as possible if you have an actual disease. People who are L haplotypes, who naturally are very coupled and live on the equator, if they go extremely north, they will not do well because their engine isn't running that way. They won't be able to make heat as well, and it's not something that their body evolutionarily was designed to do. But people who are up here, they can live on the equator. Your mitochondria can ultimately couple those respiratory proteins back together over many months to years if need be. So if you're starting to get a lot of chronic diseases wherever you're at, one of the famous dictums from Dr. Cruzs is, you will not get well in the environment that got you sick. So there are not necessarily diseases. There are lack of energy being produced by your mitochondria, and then those organs don't work well. So you got to figure out what's breaking your mitochondria, what's wrong in your environment. And generally, you should always start with your light environment first, because light programs the different respiratory proteins in the mitochondria. So I think that's all I want to show on this one slide here. Let me flip this around. All right, welcome back. Thank you for joining. So I think that's the big gist of it is that, highly consider, looking at your own family history, how healthy was your mom, how healthy was her mom. That'll give you your starting blocks of life. Then you can also look at 23andMe or Ancestry, I believe, has it, and get your maternal mitochondrial haplotype. It'll be a letter and a number sometimes after it. And that'll tell you where your people are originally from. One thing I didn't talk too much about was heteroplasmy. Heteroplasmy is essentially the amount of defective mitochondria that are in the cell. If you think of the mitochondria as your engines, it's essentially how many engines aren't working so well. And if you do the right combination of things, you can get the engines to either repair themselves or the body to tell the defective engines, we need to get rid of you, and they take them out. Those are called autophagy and apoptosis, respectively. But the mitochondria that don't make good energy, your body needs to try to get rid of those things. And if you have too many of them that aren't making energy, that is a higher heteroplasmy rate. And so, ballpark every 10 years of life, the heteroplasmy rate will increase by 10%. So that's why the majority of diseases start kicking off when people are 50, 60, 70, because their heteroplasmy rates start to get to about 60, 70%. And once you hit, I think ballpark 60, 70%, you're going to start manifesting diseases in the organs that are affected. One thing I did learn this weekend that was a little bit a good refresher is that the heteroplasmy rate of your mitochondria, or how defective certain ones are, can be completely different in your brain, in your heart, in your skeletal system. So every organ has a different heteroplasmy rate. So if you have something that's really not working, you need to get it into the right light environment. So the right light environment, top to bottom from a day would be, if you're waking up before sunrise, protecting your eyes and your skin from the artificial light in your house. You can see my background's red because I'm using a red light to keep the room illuminated. And then seeing the sunrise, I always get the question, how much? As much as you can tolerate. It does not need to be directly staring at the sun. You can stare off to the sun. If you can't see the sun because of a building or horizon, try to move if you can, but if you can't, still getting the color of the light from the sky on your eyes and skin is going to be beneficial. Then when you're inside, protecting your eyes at all times with some type of blue blocking lens. So there's multiple manufacturers of them. I've given multiple lectures on this before. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have a whole episode on all the qualities of the best blue blocking glasses. So hit me up there if you have any questions for that about which glasses. But wearing the glasses whenever you're in front of things with screens or you're under artificial light that is less than optimal. And I've done previous talks on what are optimal lights. And then, from a food aspect, I'm not a food guru, and I don't plan to be, and I don't want to be. Food is important, but it's not the most important thing. Light controls all the food networks. So light grows the plant. You either eat the plant or eat the animal that ate the plant. So light is the primordial thing that you need to be concerned about. It's important to know, the time of day that you're putting the nutrients into the system. It's basically like eating liquid sunshine, and that your mitochondria break down to ultimately convert into energy. So putting it in when it's daylight and stopping when it's dark is usually a good rough estimate to do. You've heard me many times talk about the Circadian Code book by Dr. Panda. I still recommend that book. It gives all the explanations why time-restricted eating is very important for longevity and overall health. But one of the benefits is that if you stop eating 4 hours before you go to bed, certain clocks in the genes will switch off. And that gives the body time to repair your mitochondria overnight. If you eat at 10 o'clock at night and go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, your body's going to take 4 hours before it figures out, hey, nothing else is coming in, and then the repair mechanisms start up. So you shortchange yourself in the recycling program if you're eating too late at night. So I think that's the gist of everything I want to kind of go over tonight about mitochondria and kind of them being the major sources of illness. So I'll open it up to any questions that there are. And I know that I have one on Instagram, so I'll pull that one first. But if there's any coming in off Zoom, I'll be happy to answer those ones too. All right. So there's a question coming in. How can you tell how many bad mitochondria you have? Is there a specific test for this? There's not a clinically accessible test yet to tell you how bad the heteroplasmy rate is in your mitochondria. But if you have a chronic medical condition, you have an autoimmune condition, you have a cancer, you have heart disease, you have a neurodegenerative or brain disorder, you have bad mitochondria in that space. And it can't tell you exactly how much, but it's probably that 60 to 70% heteroplasmy rate. And if you do the optimal light diet and eat high omega-3s to replenish the cell membranes of certain things, you can somewhat start reversing those heteroplasmy rates. But as I said earlier, as Dr. Cruzs says, if you're sick in a certain environment and you're biohacking it to the best of your ability, if those things aren't working, then where your original maternal haplotype is from looking at 23andMe, if you're extremely northern haplotype, you will probably need to move south to basically use the sun's power to recharge the batteries, the mitochondria batteries. So if you can't get well in the place you're at, the quick and dirty trick is fly down, go to, I don't know if you necessarily can easily fly into Cancun right now, I haven't checked that part, but Cancun area, Cozumel, those areas are very good to know if you're going to be able to regenerate with the sun's power. There's also very good magnetic flux, standing on the sand. You might not necessarily heal in 1 week in Cancun, but you should feel something different. Sleep better, joints hurt, don't hurt as much, and at least give you directionally know if the environment is the major issue for you. And then you just try to recreate the best environment for your mitochondria then. There is, at Doug Wallace's lab in Pennsylvania, or Philadelphia, I should say, he can test for certain mitochondrial disorders, but it's very research oriented. I mean, they're looking for most part childhood disease where there's the mitochondria dysfunction is at birth. So, but for middle-aged or older person, there's not really a commercial test that tells you anything about your heteroplasmy rate. It's just that if you don't have the energy to work those systems, things will start breaking in those systems. That's a very good question. Excuse me. Yes, I agree. This person would rather go to Cancun than Philly. Yes, I'd only go to Philly if I needed to talk to Doug Wallace. Otherwise, I'm not going to go there for any health reasons. All right. Hi Yuri, thanks for joining. So I'm going to post this back on IGTV later, so I'll go through the whole summary about the mitochondria and how it can be optimized. Here's a question coming off of Zoom. What was Dr. K's objection to Florida? He doesn't have an objection to Florida. I know he's currently in Destin right now. So the Panhandle of Florida, he doesn't have a problem with people going to, especially during the off season. All right, question off of Instagram. Any specific info on exercise and mitochondrial health is types of exercise? It's a good question. So I mean, you can basically stress test your mitochondria with exercise because you're making the flow of oxygen or the electrons flow faster to the oxygen that's going through the system. So, if you're a relatively healthy person, then, interval training, fast, slow type of cardio exercise is probably the best at stimulating that part. But I'm always going to recommend the resistance training, strength training to build up your muscle mass because that's really your metabolic currency. The more muscle mass that you have, the better your metabolism tends to run and the better you tend to age. So you need two types of exercise, some type of cardio, but mostly interval type cardio and resistance training. Question about how long should you hold off on showering after a morning walk in the sun? There's no particular time. I don't have any guidelines saying that you need to do anything special about that. And then how can you tell if you received excessive sun? If you really start burning and peeling, that's too much for you at that point. So if you are very pale skin, a light Fitzpatrick type, you probably only need 5 minutes of sun a day, and you would work your way up. If you're African American with very dark skin, a Fitzpatrick type 5, you probably need 5 to 10 times as much sun as somebody who's very pale, because that melanin in the skin is basically a natural sun protector. This is the reason people have very dark skin on the equator, because they're in 12 hours of high UV content. And if you had very light skin, it would fry your skin. So their bodies over time develop more melanin in it, and that's why their skin is darker. That's why when you tan, your skin turns darker. It's your natural sunscreen. So I've, previously kind of talked about some of Dr. Cruz's solar callus. I think I've done Instagram about that before. But essentially, the more red light you get in the morning time, that preconditions your skin. Red light is in the sun all day long. UV light comes out at different times of day, depending on what your latitude is on Earth. So there's a D. I always talk about the D Minder Pro app that tells you what time of day that UVB is out, so that you can make vitamin D on your skin. UVA comes out before that and stays around after UVB goes away, but it gives you directionally what time of day the UV radiation's out. So you get a bunch of red light on your skin in the morning time, as much skin as you can expose, preconditions the skin, so when UV light comes out, you're able to tolerate more of it. And then if you somewhat overdo it, just because the skin turns pink doesn't mean you're burning. That's just this pooling of your blood, basically the red blood cells coming to the surface to absorb all the UV light and act like little ferry boats to transport the light around the system. But if you get more red light in the evening time, so use a light box like I have, or use nature's light box, see the sunset with your bare skin, you can repair any of the excessive light that you got in the midday. Question, have you been able to determine your mitochondrial DNA yet? I don't know exactly if that answer is, like what the genes are. No, they don't know. I don't think you can actually look at the mitochondrial genes per se on any type of commercial test, but you can get your mitochondrial haplotype, your DNA code word essentially. So that's on 23andMe. It's part of the routine test, and it's very useful to know kind of what your baseline function should be. If St. Louis at its latitude is optimized for you. So I'm going to start recommending more and more people do 23andMe or wherever they want to get it from. I don't have any commercial interest in 23andMe. That's just where I personally did it, and it's just fairly easy to get. But it'd be very useful to know your mitochondrial haplotype. Thank you for joining. And I'll wait for other questions to come in. If there's any feedback you have for me, if there's something else you would like to learn about, I'm always happy to do that. We're going to keep doing these talks every Monday night, 6 p.m. And, we'll hit over whatever biohacking topics or, heart disease prevention topics, most people are interested in. So. The question here is, where do I get my red light? I have a couple different manufacturers, but the one that I currently got on is the EMR Tech. I have the Firewave. They also make a larger panel. If you're interested in more information about that, I can always send people links. So either if you're one of my current patients, just send us a message to the office and we'll send you the information. If you're on Instagram, I can always essentially text you a link. I do want to be respectful of everybody's light, so I should say respectful of their time. So if there's not too many more questions, then I'll let people go in just a moment. But I just want to let you know where you can find me. If you're watching on Instagram, you're already on Instagram and you know where I'm at. Instagram is where I put the majority of my kind of health optimization tips, my biohacking journey. I pretty much post every day on my IG stories. So if you don't follow me on Instagram yet, that's and you're on social media, that's probably the most place I'm active and put the most content on. I'm going to start having a new website soon where a lot of these videos will be hosted. But for now, best to still go to my apollocardiology.com website to see what's most up to date with our practice. And then for the Zoom people, if you hold on for a minute, I'll try to get the link and put it in the chat box, and you guys can see the information for the light box that I generally recommend. And there's a question: what info do I need to purchase glasses on Amazon? For most of that, is that the glasses that I recommend aren't on Amazon, because most of the glasses on Amazon are either cheap knockoffs or they're not the right intensity of blue blocking. So there's really only 3 manufacturers I recommended that. ApolloCardiology.com, I have links to all the 3 major manufacturers that I usually recommend. And a question, can I send the map? I basically just went Google and looked at it. I don't, let's see if I can actually add it here. So, not sure if that'll work. All right. Well, for a reason I can't upload any type of files at the moment, but I will at least put the links in there. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for joining me tonight. It's a pleasure as always to share my Monday nights with you guys, and answer whatever questions you have. If you need anything in the interim, just send me a DM in Instagram, or if you're on Zoom, just shoot us a email or text to the office at Apollo Cardiology. And have a great night, and we'll see you guys next Monday evening. Take care.